Lieutenant Mixtan had always believed that the worst part of working in xenobiology observation was the mind-numbing boredom. 12-hour shifts spent watching alien creatures do absolutely nothing interesting, while filing endless reports about their absolutely uninteresting activities, all while floating in the vacuum of space in a tin can that smelled perpetually of recycled air and regret. He was about to learn that boredom was not, in fact, the worst part of his job. "Commander Zetex Vul to the observation deck," he called through the ship's communication system, his voice carrying the kind of barely controlled panic usually reserved for announcing imminent reactor meltdowns. "Priority Alpha situation developing on the planetary surface." Lieutenant Mixton, a young Vorthon with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy, consulted his holographic display with the enthusiasm of someone reading his own death warrant. "Ma'am, the initial report states that a lone human female has established unauthorized contact with indigenous fauna." Indigenous fauna. Commander Zetex Vul's voice carried the kind of dry sarcasm usually reserved for describing cosmic jokes. "That's what we're calling them now?" "Well, ma'am, the technical classification would be Category 8 apex predators, with extreme territorial aggression and documented pack-hunting intelligence levels that exceed standard safety parameters. In other words, the kind of creatures that could turn a fully armored hegemony squad into artisanal meat paste within approximately 30 seconds. That would be accurate, yes, ma'am." Commander Zatex Vul closed her eyes and counted to 50 in Old Vorthon, a meditation technique she'd learned during her first assignment and had been using with increasing frequency ever since humanity had blundered onto the galactic stage. Humans had a talent for making the impossible seem routine, usually while completely ignoring every established protocol for survival in a hostile universe. "And this human," she continued, opening her eyes to fix Lieutenant Mixtan with a stare that could have melted titanium, "has not only survived contact with these apex predators but has somehow convinced them to—" What was the phrase in the report? Mixtan's throat sac inflated nervously, a sure sign that a Vorthan was about to deliver news that nobody wanted to hear. "Allow her to provide care for their offspring, ma'am." "Their offspring." "Yes, ma'am. The apex predators are letting a human handle their babies." "That appears to be the situation, ma'am." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either enlightenment or complete psychological breakdown. Commander Zetex Vul opted for a third option: professional resignation mixed with a healthy dose of gallows humor. "Show me the feed." The main display flickered to life, revealing a scene that defied every piece of xenobiology training Commander Zetex Vul had ever received. In a cleared area beside what appeared to be a primitive human shelter, a crackling fire cast dancing shadows across an impossible tableau. A human female, appearing to be in her mid-20s with red hair and freckled skin, was carefully tending to 3 small, wet creatures near the warmth of the flames. The creatures in question were unmistakably cubs of the local apex predator species, which the hegemony had classified as Ursus maximus terrifius, or, in common parlance, giant death bears. "Are those cubs wet because they fell in water, or because their mothers tried to drown them to prevent human contamination?" Commander Zetex Vul asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer and wasn't going to like it. "According to our environmental monitoring, there was a severe storm approximately 2 hours ago. Flash flooding in the regional river system would have posed significant danger to juvenile fauna." "So the cubs got caught in floodwater?" "Yes, ma'am. And somehow ended up in the care of a human." "So it would appear, ma'am." Commander Zetex Vul watched as the human, completely oblivious to the fact that she was handling creatures capable of growing into 1,000-pound creatures-killing machines, gently dried each cub with what appeared to be soft fabric. The cubs, meanwhile, were making sounds that the computer translated as contentment vocalizations. "Where?" she asked with the kind of careful precision usually reserved for defusing antimatter bombs, "are the mothers?" Lieutenant Mixtan manipulated his display, and the view expanded to show the surrounding forest. Commander Zetex Vul's breath caught in her throat as the enhanced imaging revealed no fewer than 6 adult giant death bears positioned in a perfect defensive perimeter around the humans' campsite. They were watching. Just watching. Silent as shadows, motionless as statues, and completely, utterly focused on the human who was caring for their cubs. "How long have they been there?" Commander Zitex-Vul whispered, though she wasn't sure why she was whispering. Perhaps because the scene on the screen seemed too fragile to disturb with loud voices. "Since the human began tending to the cubs, ma'am. Our behavioral analysis software indicates they're exhibiting protective positioning rather than attack preparation. They're guarding her." "It would appear so, ma'am." Commander Zitex-Vul felt her worldview perform several complex somersaults before landing in a heap somewhere between fascination and terror. The apex predators are protecting the human who's protecting their young. That seems to be the accurate assessment, ma'am. On screen, the human had finished drawing the first cub and was now examining it carefully, her hands moving with gentle competence as she checked for injuries. The cub submitted to this examination with perfect trust, occasionally making small sounds that suggested it was actually enjoying the attention. "Does our xenobiology database have any record of giant death bears allowing physical contact with non-species entities?" "None whatsoever, ma'am. In fact, our files specifically state that any approach within 50 meters of giant death bear cubs should be considered a death sentence, as the mothers will attack anything they perceive as a threat to their offspring. And yet, ma'am." Commander Zitex-Vul activated her personal communication system. "This is Commander Zitex-Vul to Hegemony Command. Priority Alpha communication requested." The response came within seconds, as it always did when field commanders used the Priority Alpha designation. The stern features of Admiral Kix-Noll appeared on her secondary display, his expression already showing the kind of weary patience that suggested he'd been dealing with human-related incidents all day. "Commander Zitex-Vul, please tell me this isn't another human situation." "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir." Admiral Kix-Noll's expression shifted from weary patience to active resignation. "What have they done now? Please tell me they haven't accidentally declared war on another species by misunderstanding their mating rituals." "Not exactly, sir. We have a human female who appears to have established a cooperative relationship with Category 8 apex predators." "Cooperative how?" "She's babysitting their cubs while the mothers watch approvingly from the surrounding forest." The silence that followed was so profound that Commander Zitex-Vul briefly wondered if the communication link had failed. Then Admiral Kix-Noll's voice returned, carrying the tone of someone whose grip on reality had just loosened significantly. "She's what?" "Providing childcare services to apex predator offspring, sir. The cubs were apparently caught in flooding, and the human intervened to provide rescue and care." "And the mothers?" "Are maintaining a protective perimeter around the human's position. They appear to be treating her as a trusted ally rather than a threat." Admiral Kix-Noll closed his eyes and began the deep breathing exercises that all senior hegemony officers learned for dealing with impossible situations. "Commander, in your professional opinion, how has this human managed to survive this encounter?" "Sir, I honestly have no idea. Every piece of training and experience I possess says this situation should have ended with the human being converted into component atoms within the first 30 seconds of contact. But instead, she appears to have accidentally become part of an extended apex predator family unit." On the main display, the human had moved on to the second cub, this one apparently having suffered a minor scratch during its flood adventure. She was cleaning the wound with what appeared to be water from a metal container, her movements careful and practiced. The cub held perfectly still, as if it understood that she was helping. "Has she had any training in xenobiology or interspecies relations?" Admiral Kix-Noll asked. Lieutenant Mix-Tan quickly consulted his databases. "Sir, according to our files, her name is Emma Ford-Wallace. She's a wilderness survival instructor from the North American continent. No formal xenobiology training, no advanced degrees in animal behavior, no diplomatic credentials whatsoever." "A survival instructor." "Yes, sir. Apparently she teaches humans how to live in natural environments without technological assistance." Admiral Kix-Noll was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. So, a human with basic survival knowledge has managed to establish peaceful relations with creatures that our trained xenobiologists classify as unsurvivable contact scenarios. That appears to be correct, sir. This is either the most remarkable diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history, or we're about to witness the most spectacular failure of human judgment ever recorded. Commander Zetex Vul watched as Emma Ford-Wallace finished treating the second cub and moved on to the third. This one was smaller than the others and seemed to be suffering from exhaustion rather than injury. The human's response was to wrap it in what appeared to be a dry blanket and hold it close to the fire, murmuring what the translation software identified as soothing vocalizations. "Sir," Commander Zetex Vul said slowly, "I don't think this is going to end in spectacular failure." "Why not?" "Because she's not treating this as a diplomatic situation or a survival scenario. She's treating it like—" Commander Zetex Vul paused, searching for the right words. "Like a routine childcare emergency." Meaning? Meaning she's not thinking about the fact that these are Category 8 apex predators. She's thinking about the fact that they're scared, cold, wet babies who need help. And somehow that difference in perspective is making all the difference in outcome. Admiral Kix considered this. "Are you suggesting that human success with interspecies relations is based on their tendency to anthropomorphize everything they encounter?" "I'm suggesting that maybe our scientific classifications are missing something important about how emotional intelligence affects interspecies communication." On screen, the smallest cub had stopped shivering and was now making the kind of soft sounds that indicated comfort and security. Emma Ford-Wallace continued to hold it, occasionally adjusting its position to ensure it stayed warm, completely unaware that she was conducting the most successful interspecies diplomatic mission in recorded history. "Commander," Admiral Kix said finally, "maintain observation, but do not interfere. I want continuous monitoring of this situation." "Yes, sir." "Should I prepare a contact team in case of emergency?" "No. Something tells me that any intervention on our part would only complicate what appears to be a naturally developing situation." The communication ended, leaving Commander Zetex Vul alone with her thoughts and the increasingly impossible scene on her screens. As she watched, one of the mother bears emerged from the forest, moving with the kind of careful deliberation that indicated she was approaching something precious. Emma Ford-Wallace looked up as the massive creature approached, but showed no signs of fear. Instead, she shifted position slightly, still holding the smallest cub, and began speaking in the same soothing tones she'd been using with the babies. The mother bear settled down about 10 feet away, close enough to supervise but far enough to give the human space to work. Her massive head tilted as she observed the human caring for her offspring, and Commander Zetex Vul could have sworn she saw approval in those intelligent eyes. "This is not how first contact is supposed to work," Commander Zetex Vul muttered to herself. "This is not how any of this is supposed to work." But as she watched Emma Ford-Wallace continue her impromptu childcare duties while apex predator mothers maintained their silent vigil, she had to admit that sometimes the universe had a sense of humor that transcended all rational planning. And sometimes, the most profound diplomatic breakthroughs happened not in conference rooms or through careful negotiation, but around a simple fire where someone saw babies in need and decided to help, regardless of what species they belonged to. 3 hours later, Commander Zetex Vul was seriously considering the benefits of early retirement, and a nice quiet desk job somewhere far away from humans and their inexplicable ability to turn every scientific certainty into cosmic comedy. The situation had evolved in ways that made her question not just her training, but the fundamental nature of reality itself. Emma Ford-Wallace was no longer simply caring for 3 wayward cubs. She was now hosting what could only be described as an interspecies daycare center. 2 more mothers had emerged from the forest, each bringing their own offspring, apparently having decided that the strange 2-legged creature was running some sort of premium childcare service. "How many cubs are we looking at now?" Commander Zetex Vul asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. 7, ma'am," Lieutenant Mixton replied, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had given up trying to make sense of the universe. "And we're detecting movement from at least 4 more adult signatures in the surrounding forest." 4 more. Yes, ma'am. It appears word has spread through the local apex predator community that there's a human running a nursery. Commander Zetex Vul watched the display as Emma organized her charges with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested she dealt with groups of potentially lethal baby animals on a regular basis. The cubs were arranged in a rough circle around the fire, some sleeping, others playing with sticks and stones under Emma's watchful supervision. She's teaching them, Science Officer Drixnell observed from her station, her four eyes focused on different aspects of the scene. Look at the behavioral patterns. She's demonstrating tool use, environmental awareness, and social cooperation. To apex predator cubs. Yes, ma'am. And they're learning. Indeed, one of the larger cubs was carefully mimicking Emma's actions as she showed it how to build a small shelter from branches and leaves. The cub's attempts were clumsy, but enthusiastic, and Emma's patient corrections were met with obvious eagerness to try again. Sir, came a new voice from the communications station. We're receiving a transmission from Hegemony Scientific Division. Dr. Kelvos wants to speak with you directly. Dr. Kelvos appeared on the secondary display, her reptilian features showing the kind of intense curiosity that made Commander Zetex Vul immediately nervous. The good doctor had a reputation for enthusiasm that frequently exceeded common sense. Commander, I've been reviewing your reports, and I simply must study this phenomenon firsthand. I'm requesting immediate transport to your location. Absolutely not, Commander Zetex Vul replied without hesitation. Dr. Kelvos, with all due respect, the surface is currently occupied by approximately 8 Category 8 apex predators, and one human who has somehow convinced them she's a licensed daycare provider. Precisely why I need to observe. This could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies behavioral dynamics. It could also revolutionize you into component molecules if those mothers decide you're a threat to their cubs. Dr. Kelvos waved dismissively. Commander, I've spent decades studying predator behavior. I know how to approach potentially dangerous fauna. Doctor, these predators have formed a cooperative alliance with a human. I don't think your textbooks covered this scenario. Before Dr. Kelvos could respond, the display showing Emma's camp suddenly filled with motion. Commander Zetex Vul's blood froze as she saw 6 adult giant death bears moving rapidly toward the clearing where Emma sat with their cubs. Battle stations! She shouted, her command training overriding her scientific curiosity. Prepare for emergency evacuation protocols. But as the adults reached the clearing, instead of the massacre Commander Zetex Vul expected, something even more impossible occurred. The bears arranged themselves in a perfect circle around Emma and the cubs, settling down into resting positions while maintaining alert watch on the surrounding forest. Emma looked up from her shelter-building lesson, nodded casually to the newcomers as if 800-pound predators joining her circle was perfectly normal, and continued her instruction. They're protecting her, Lieutenant Mixtan whispered. All of them. They've formed a defensive perimeter around the human and the cubs. But why? Commander Zetex Vul asked, though she suspected the answer would only make things more confusing. Her question was answered when the forest erupted with new sounds. Harsh calls and crashing vegetation announced the arrival of something that made even giant death bears seem manageable by comparison. Commander Zetex Vul's sensors identified the approaching threats, and her heart sank. Razor wolves, she breathed. A full pack, by the sound of it. Razor wolves were Category 9 predators, the kind of creatures that made Category 8 apex predators look like household pets. They hunted in coordinated packs, possessed intelligence that bordered on tactical genius, and had never been observed showing mercy to any living creature. Emma seemed to understand the danger instinctively. She quickly gathered the cubs closer to the fire, while the adult bears rose to their feet, forming an even tighter protective formation. But instead of fleeing or panicking, Emma did something that made Commander Zetex Vul question whether humans possessed any survival instincts whatsoever. She stepped forward, placing herself between the cubs and the approaching threat. What is she doing? Dr. Kelvos gasped from the communication display. Something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid, Commander Zetex Vul replied, unable to look away from the unfolding scene. The first razor wolf emerged from the forest, its sleek black form rippling with muscle and malevolent intelligence. Its pack followed, spreading out in a classic hunting formation that spoke of countless successful kills. They paused at the edge of the clearing, yellow eyes assessing the unusual gathering before them. Emma stood perfectly still, her hands visible and empty, while the giant death bears formed a living wall behind her. The tension was so thick Commander Zitex Vul could practically taste it through the ship's sensors. Then Emma did the most human thing possible. She started talking. "Easy there," her voice carried clearly through the audio pickups, calm and steady despite facing down creatures that could shred her in seconds. "I know you're hungry, but these little ones are under protection. There's no need for violence here." The lead razor wolf tilted its head, studying the human with obvious confusion. Its packmates shifted restlessly, clearly uncertain how to process a situation where prey was addressing them directly instead of running or fighting. "Look," Emma continued, slowly reaching into her pack. "I've got food. Real food. No need to hurt anyone for a meal." She withdrew what appeared to be preserved meat, tossing several pieces toward the razor wolf pack. The lead wolf sniffed the offering, then looked back at Emma with what Commander Zitex Vul could have sworn was surprise. "She's negotiating," Lieutenant Mixton said in amazement. "With Category 9 predators, she's conducting diplomatic relations with razor wolves." The lead wolf took one of the offered pieces, tasted it, then made a series of complex vocalizations to its pack. The other wolves approached cautiously, accepting the food while maintaining respectful distance from the cubs and their protectors. "This is impossible," Dr. Kelvos muttered. "Razor wolves don't negotiate. They don't accept offerings. They kill. They eat. They move on. It's their entire evolutionary strategy." "Well, apparently nobody told them that," Commander Zitex Vul observed, as the wolves settled down at the far edge of the clearing, content to eat their unexpected meal while watching the proceedings with apparent interest. Emma returned to her cubs, resuming her shelter-building lesson as if she hadn't just prevented a massacre through the simple expedient of treating apex predators like reasonable beings capable of communication and compromise. "Commander," came Admiral Kixnoll's voice over the priority channel, "I've been monitoring your reports. Please tell me the situation hasn't escalated." "Sir, it's escalated, but not in the direction anyone expected. The human has somehow established peaceful relations with multiple species of apex predators simultaneously." "How many species are we talking about?" Commander Zitex Vul counted the various creatures now occupying Emma's clearing. "2, sir. Giant death bears and razor wolves. They're currently sharing the same space without conflict, all apparently united in protecting the human and her cubs." The silence that followed was so long, Commander Zitex Vul began to wonder if the communication had failed. Finally, Admiral Kixnoll's voice returned, carrying the tone of someone whose worldview had just been thoroughly rearranged. "Commander, I want continuous monitoring of this situation. And I want our best xenobiologists studying every second of interaction. This human may have just accomplished something that our entire diplomatic corps couldn't manage in 1,000 years. Sir, Dr. Kelvos is requesting permission to make surface contact." "Absolutely denied. We're not going to risk disrupting what may be the most significant interspecies communication breakthrough in galactic history because one of our scientists can't contain her curiosity." Dr. Kelvos's protests were cut off as Admiral Kixnoll terminated the communication, leaving Commander Stex Vul alone with her crew and the impossible scene unfolding below. As the day wore on, more creatures began appearing at the edges of Emma's clearing. Smaller predators, herbivores, even some of the notoriously skittish canopy dwellers descended from the trees to observe the unprecedented gathering. None approached too closely, but all seemed drawn by the same inexplicable force that had united natural enemies in peaceful coexistence. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Mixton said quietly, "I've been running calculations on the probability of this scenario occurring naturally. And? The mathematical likelihood approaches 0, ma'am. This shouldn't be possible according to everything we know about predator behavior, territorial instincts, and species competition." Commander Zitex Vul nodded, watching as Emma shared her evening meal with cubs from 2 different species, while their mothers maintained their protective vigil. "Lieutenant, I'm beginning to suspect that everything we think we know about the universe might need some significant revision. Because of one human, ma'am. because of what one human represents. If Emma Ford-Wallace can establish peaceful relations with apex predators through nothing more than kindness, patience, and the willingness to see individuals rather than categories. Commander Zetex-Vul paused, considering the implications. What does that say about every other species we've classified as dangerous or hostile? As night fell over the forest clearing, the various creatures settled into a peaceful routine. The cubs slept close to Emma's fire while their protectors maintained watch. The razor wolves had established their own resting area nearby, apparently having decided that this strange gathering was worth observing. Even the smaller creatures had found safe spots within the protected zone, creating what could only be described as a temporary interspecies sanctuary. Emma sat by her fire, occasionally adding wood to keep it burning, while writing in what appeared to be a journal. Commander Zetex-Vul wondered what someone recorded after a day like this. How did you document the impossible? How did you describe the moment when all your assumptions about the universe turned out to be wrong? "Ma'am," Lieutenant Mixton said softly, "what do we do now?" Commander Zetex-Vul considered this question while watching a human woman serve as the unlikely center of an impossible community. We watch. We learn. And we try to figure out what Emma Ford-Wallace understands about the universe that the rest of us have been missing. As the stars emerged overhead, illuminating a scene that would rewrite xenobiology textbooks throughout the galaxy, Commander Zetex-Vul couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the most profound discoveries came not from advanced technology or sophisticated theories, but from simple acts of kindness that reminded everyone involved what it meant to be truly civilized. The peaceful night was interrupted by an urgent transmission from Hegemony High Command. Fleet Admiral Six-Tor materialized on the main display, his ancient features bearing the weight of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. "Commander Zetex-Vul, I've reviewed your reports with the full Xenobiology Council. We need immediate clarification on several points that frankly strain credibility." "Sir, I understand the situation appears impossible, but I can assure you our observations are accurate." "Commander, you're reporting that a single human has established diplomatic relations with multiple apex predator species, created an interspecies sanctuary, and somehow convinced natural enemies to coexist peacefully. Do you understand how this sounds to the scientific community?" Before Commander Zetex-Vul could respond, her sensors detected new movement in the forest. This time, however, the approaching signatures made her previous concerns seem trivial by comparison. "Sir, we have a new development," she said, her voice tight with tension. "I'm detecting aerial predators approaching the clearing." Fleet Admiral Six-Tor leaned forward. "What kind of aerial predators?" Lieutenant Mixton's hands flew over his instruments, his throat sac inflating with stress. "Category 10, sir, Shadowhawks, 3 adults, approaching fast." The communication channel fell silent. Category 10 predators were theoretical nightmares, creatures so dangerous that most species simply avoided any planet they inhabited. Shadowhawks were apex aerial hunters with talons capable of shearing through starship hull plating and intelligence levels that approached sapience. "Evacuation protocols," Fleet Admiral Six-Tor ordered. "Extract that human immediately." "Sir, with respect, any intervention attempt would likely trigger a territorial response from the ground-based predators already present. We could start a war between species that would devastate the local ecosystem." On screen, Emma looked up as the Shadowhawks circled overhead, their massive forms blotting out stars as they assessed the unusual gathering below. The bears and wolves had detected the aerial threat, shifting into defensive positions while keeping the cubs protected at the center of their formation. But instead of the aerial assault everyone expected, the Shadowhawks began a slow, spiraling descent toward the clearing. Emma stood calmly, watching their approach without showing the terror that any rational being should feel when confronted by Category 10 predators. "She's not running," Dr. Kelvos observed from her laboratory, having maintained communication despite her denied surface access. "Every survival instinct she possesses should be screaming at her to flee." The lead Shadowhawk landed at the very edge of the clearing, its massive talons digging furrows in the earth. Its intelligent eyes fixed on Emma, who approached slowly with her hands visible and empty. "This is beyond insane," Lieutenant Mixtan whispered. "She's walking toward a Category 10 predator like it's a lost pet." Emma stopped about 10 feet from the Shadowhawk and did something that made every observer question the laws of physics, biology, and common sense. She bowed. A slow, respectful acknowledgement that somehow conveyed recognition of the creature's power while demonstrating her own peaceful intentions. The Shadowhawk tilted its massive head, studying the strange gesture. Then, in a display that would be replayed in xenobiology classrooms for generations, it lowered its own head in a clear, reciprocal bow. "Did that just happen?" Fleet Admiral Sixtor asked weakly. "Sir, we have documented evidence of formal diplomatic protocol being established between a human and a Category 10 predator," Commander Zatex Vul confirmed, her voice carrying the tone of someone reporting the impossible. The other Shadowhawks landed, arranging themselves around the perimeter of the clearing in what was clearly a protective formation rather than an attack position. The ground-based predators adjusted their own positions, creating an integrated defense network that encompassed multiple species working in perfect coordination. "This changes everything," Dr. Kelvos breathed. "If predator species can overcome their territorial instincts and natural aggression to cooperate in defense of a perceived threat, then our entire understanding of ecosystem dynamics is fundamentally flawed." Emma returned to her fire, apparently satisfied with her diplomatic success, and resumed her evening routine. The cubs, initially frightened by the aerial arrivals, gradually relaxed as they realized the Shadowhawks posed no threat to their sanctuary. "Commander," Fleet Admiral Sixtor said slowly, "I'm upgrading this situation to galactic priority status. I want every xenobiology expert in the hegemony studying these interactions." "Sir, should we attempt contact with the human?" "Absolutely not. We're dealing with someone who has accomplished more in one day than our diplomatic corps has managed in centuries. Any interference could disrupt processes we don't begin to understand." A new voice joined the communication channel. "Fleet Admiral, this is Dr. Nex Prim from the Institute of Advanced Xenobiology. I've been analyzing the behavioral patterns, and I believe we're witnessing the emergence of a new form of interspecies communication." "Explain." "The human isn't using language, technology, or any conventional diplomatic tools. She's communicating through what can only be described as emotional resonance. She's projecting intentions and receiving responses on a level that transcends species barriers." Commander Zetex Vul watched as Emma gently scratched behind the ears of a bear cub, while one of the Shadowhawks preened its feathers nearby, apparently content to be part of the peaceful gathering. "Dr. Nex Prim, are you suggesting that humans possess some form of telepathic ability?" "Not telepathy in the traditional sense, more like an enhanced capacity for empathic communication. She reads the emotional states of other species and responds appropriately, while simultaneously projecting her own peaceful intentions in ways that transcend verbal communication." "And this works on Category 10 predators?" "Apparently, the higher the intelligence level, the more receptive the species is to this form of communication. The Shadowhawks responded to her diplomatic gesture because they recognized it as a form of respect between equals." Fleet Admiral Sixtor was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "Doctor, if humans possess this capability, why haven't we observed it before?" "Sir, we've never placed humans in situations where their survival depended on communicating with alien predators. Most species develop these abilities only under extreme environmental pressure. This human may represent the next stage in human evolutionary development." Commander Zetex Vul felt a chill run down her spine. If humans were evolving enhanced empathic abilities, what did that mean for the galaxy's balance of power? A species that could communicate with any life form would possess diplomatic advantages that bordered on the supernatural. "Sir," Lieutenant Mixtan reported, "we're detecting additional movement throughout the forest. It appears word of this gathering is spreading through the entire ecosystem." Indeed, the sensors showed creatures great and small moving toward Emma's clearing. Herbivores that should have fled from the assembled predators were approaching peacefully. Aerial species were landing nearby. Even typically solitary hunters were joining the unprecedented assembly. She's created a neutral zone, Dr. Kelvos observed. A space where natural laws of predation and territorial behavior are suspended in favor of peaceful coexistence. Emma seemed completely unaware of the historic significance of her actions. She continued caring for the cubs, maintaining her fire, and occasionally exchanging what appeared to be meaningful looks with various members of her diverse audience. To her, this was apparently just another day of wilderness survival, slightly complicated by having more neighbors than usual. "Fleet Admiral," Commander Zitex Vul said carefully, "request permission to remain on station indefinitely. I believe we're witnessing something that will reshape our understanding of consciousness, communication, and cooperation across species lines." "Granted. Commander, you are now in charge of the most important scientific observation mission in galactic history. Document everything. And Commander, sir, make sure nothing happens to that human. If she can teach us what she knows about interspecies communication, she might just prevent every territorial war the galaxy has ever seen." As dawn approached, the clearing had transformed into something resembling a peaceful convention of apex predators. Species that had never coexisted were now sharing space under Emma's unknowing guidance, creating a living testament to the power of empathy over instinct. And sometimes, the universe's greatest teachers turned out to be wilderness survival instructors, who just happened to believe that every living being deserved compassion, regardless of how many teeth they had, or what category the scientists had assigned them.